Well, 2 Kings chapter 4, continuing on with the stories here with Elijah. So in this one, we're going to hear several miracles about Elijah and learn more about some of the things that he does that's similar to what his predecessor Elijah did, and look for the things that he does in this chapter that make you think of the Savior and the miracles that he performed too. There's some really good stuff in here. So, okay, verse 1. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elijah, saying, Thy servant, my husband, is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditors come to take unto him my 2 sons to be bondmen. And so this woman is one of the wives of the sons of the prophets. So she was married to one of the other priests, basically. And her husband has passed away. The problem is their family borrowed money. They got into a debt with somebody. It has not been paid back. Her husband is dead, so it's going to be even harder to pay it back. And so when the creditor comes to say, I want to be compensated for this loan, basically, he's going to want to take one or both of her sons, basically, and sell them into slavery. Either they would take him as a slave to work off the debt, or they would sell them to somebody else and then take the money, and that would be how they covered the debt. Just so you know, this was very common back then. Okay, back then, we have to understand 2 important things about this. One is they were on a true monetary system. And what I mean by that is if you had gold coins, the gold coin itself had value. Okay, money today only has value that as an IOU from the government. Okay, the money we have today has no value in and of itself, by itself. It's the government that backs up the money is where the value is. So if you believe in that government, then you will believe in their money. If you don't believe in that government, then you might not believe in their money. And that's a huge fundamental difference, okay? Back then, if you had gold and silver coins, they were worth something because they were gold and silver coins. They had weight, they had value. They also did a lot of barter and trade back then. So you could trade wheat or meat or crops or other things for money and vice versa. So they still had a system of exchange, but it was kind of a barter/monetary system in there. So money was real. Money was a legit thing back then. They didn't have inflation and other things like that we have today quite like we have it. So it's a very different economic structure they had. But here's the thing is being a slave or a bondman was very, very common. If you borrowed money, okay, this is real money, you borrowed coins from somebody, they had like gold coins or silver coins, whatever, you had to pay them back, oftentimes with a little interest. If you couldn't, then you were sold as a slave. You either worked for them to work off that debt, basically, or you were to basically be sold to somebody else, so you'd be a slave for them, and then the money that they made would be their compensation. So if they didn't want you as a slave, they could sell you to somebody else and get compensated quickly. So this was a very common thing. I know in our day and age, it sounds totally foreign and crazy to do that, but this was super common back then. This is just how life was back then. Just like we have smartphones and TVs today and computers and everything else, that's just how life was. Okay, so just realize that. So let's be careful trying to judge the past with today's perspective. It doesn't work as well. We need to understand the past from the past and understand their beliefs and ideas to make it more sense of it. So just understand that's what's happening. It's a very common thing back then. So verse 2, Elijah said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in the house? And she said, Thine handmaid hath not anything in the house save a pot of oil. Then he said, Go, borrow thee vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. So he says, well, what else do you have in your house? What else could you use for this debt? And she says, I just got 1 pot of oil and that's it. We are literally dirt poor. And he says, well, then go borrow a bunch of vessels. When he talks about vessels, he's not talking about like a boat. He's talking about a vase or a container. Today we would call it Tupperware. Back then it was clay containers, basically. And he says, go get a bunch of them. Go get a bunch of them. Verse 4, and when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and upon thy sons, and shalt pour out into all those vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. So he says, take the oil you have, pour a little bit in all of these vessels, basically. Verse 5, so when she went from him and shut the door upon her and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, bring me yet a vessel. And he said unto her, there is not a vessel more, and the oil stayed. So this is cool. So he's saying, take that one thing of vessel, that one thing of oil, and fill the rest of them up. Okay, and so in her mind, she's probably thinking, I'm going to pour, and he tells her basically, pour until it's full, then set that vessel aside and go to the next vessel and pour it till it's full and keep doing that. The miracle was basically she took one vessel of oil and turned it into a bunch of vessels full of oil. So that oil duplicated itself. If you remember, this is pretty similar to Elijah. If you remember the story, put in the comments where that story in Elijah is. In fact, it'd be fun to make sure to see where you guys are thinking about that story as well. Elijah did something similar with the woman that he helped, or they helped him too. So verse 7, then she came and told the man of God, and he said, go sell the oil and pay thy debt, and live thou and thy children of the rest. How cool is that? Holy cow. Oil was created out of nothing. She can now sell it. She can pay off her debt. Now she can live on the rest of the oil that's there. And she doesn't have a debt. So she frees herself up from those encumbrances. So what a great principle. Okay, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice to know how the Lord can help you pay off your debt that you have? This would be great. In fact, I would dare say, if that sounds important to you, make sure you're keeping the commandments, doing what's right, and talk with the Lord through prayer and seek inspiration from him, the scriptures and things. And you might be prompted to do some things to help you to pay off debts that you have. So debt today is not quite the same as it was back then. Our society literally runs on debt, and without debt, our economy would fall apart completely. So it's a little bit different monetary structure than they had back then, but it still doesn't get rid of the fact that being debt-free is a good idea. So really great opportunity that she has in her life now. Verse 8, and it fell on a day that Elijah passed to Shunem. There was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. So this is a woman. So Elijah's passing by this place passing to go to Shunem, this place. And there's this great woman. She happens to live near the roads, and every time Elijah comes by, she insists he comes in and eats. So she is, in a way, taking care of him as he is passing through. One thing that's interesting about this verse is how it began. Okay, and it fell on a day. Kind of a cool way to think about that, and it's interesting to, what do you think that means? It fell on a day. Well, I mean, technically, it did fall on a day because that's all we have are days. It fell on one day. We don't know which day, but it fell on a day. Interesting is that this phrase, this is the only place in all the scriptures that you can find that phrase. Basically, that's it. So really interesting that that's there. Verse 9, and she said unto her husband, behold, now I perceive that this is an holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. So as he's going back and forth, she's always like, hey, Elijah, come over here. And she's realizing this guy's a prophet. This guy is like amazing. He's a man of God. So verse 10, let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed and a table and a stool and a candlestick. And it shall be when he cometh to us that he shall turn in thither. So she is saying that she's like, I think this is a man of God. We should take more care of him. He's a special person. We want to help him out. So they want to make this little chamber. Now, what they're talking about here is different than what you might think. In Freeman's book, Manners and Customs of the Bible, page 171, he says the aliyah, or chamber, is an upper room of an eastern house, being sometimes built on the roof, and sometimes making a second story to the porch, to which it has access by stairs. It is hence called in 2 Samuel the chamber over the gate. In the text, it is called a chamber in the wall, probably because its window opening to the street made a break in the dead wall and was thus about the only evidence to an outside spectator of the existence of rooms in the house. It is usually well furnished and kept as a room for the entertainment of honored guests. So when she says, let us make a little chamber, what she's saying is, let's make a guest room on our home so that when the prophet comes, he has a place to sleep. He can hang out. Now, it might sound weird. There's a bed, there's a table, a stool, and a candlestick. That was luxury, basically. If you got that, that was a fully furnished room, basically. I know it doesn't sound like that for us today. We just live in a very different society and world than they did back then. Now, here's that same thing again. Again, this is the only place, this chapter is the only place in Scripture you'll find this phrase. Verse 11, and it fell on a day, a little bit of literariness in this, that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. So another day came, he comes by, and she's like, hey, come in, we got some bread. Hey, by the way, we've got a room for you. Oh, that's so wonderful. So he goes up and he takes a nap, basically. He lays there. Verse 12, and he said to Gehazi, his servant, call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, say now unto her, behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the host? And she answered, I dwell among mine own people. So he is saying basically, hey, what can I do for you? What can I do to help you out? You've been so gracious to me, to feed me, to now house me. Basically, what can I do to help you out? And she said, I dwell among my own people. And for us, that might be like, well, of course you do. You're living in Shunem among the Shunamites, and you're a Shunammite. So this is kind of a duh thing. But what it really means, if you look at it, is basically says, I don't need anything. I'm good. I am home. I have a home. I've got myself taken care of. I don't need anything. So verse 14, and he said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, verily she hath no child, and her husband is old. So Gehazi, the Elisha's servant, realizes, you know what? She doesn't have any kids. And her husband is old, so there's no way to have family continue for them. That, having a son means the name and the family moves forward. Without that, your line dies, your lineage ends, and there's nothing there, basically. So verse 15, and he said, call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, about this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, nay, my lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thy handmaid. So he tells her, look, apparently she really would like to have a son. That was a very common thing. You were kind of praised, and that was seen as a good omen to have a son back then, because he could, carry on that name, be another person in the household, those kinds of things. So he says, I'm going to bless you with my apostolic calling to bless you so that you can have a son about this time next year. Basically, somewhere about this season, according to the time of life, kind of, it's going to take 9 months, but about this season, basically, give or take some time, you're going to have a son. And she basically, now she said here, nay, my Lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thy handmaid. Now that's it, on face value, that would seem as if she's ungrateful for what Elijah is doing. We have to look at this. She was saying basically, please let your words come true. Let's don't tell me a story, that get my hopes up and have it not be true. Please, I want this to be true. Verse 17, and the woman conceived and bare a son at that season that Elijah had said unto her according to the time of life. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, my head, my head. And he said to lad, carry him to a lad, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and then died. So something happened to his head. It could be that he got hit. The reapers are the ones out there with the big size reaping. Maybe he got hit, big gash on his head. He bled out. Could be thrombosis, a hemorrhage in his brain. He got hit in the head. There could be like an industrial accident or something happened. We don't know. It doesn't give us that information in here as to what actually happened. Just he's complaining about his head. I mean, he could have had like a stroke or something up there. He could have had aneurysm or something else could have happened, something internal. We don't know. Maybe he had a brain tumor or something. We don't know. We don't know what it is. Something happened. He's hurt, and it's his head. That's all we know. So he has somebody else take his son home, and mom's cuddling him, holding him close, and he passes away, basically. Verse 21, and she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. And she called unto her husband and said, send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again. And he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. So let me pause there for just a brief second to talk about this. So she wants to go talk to Elijah. Basically, she's like, let me go, give me a servant and give me one of the asses so we can ride and let's go. Because in that culture, that day and age, a woman going by herself was not a good thing. People wouldn't treat her properly or treat her well. So there had to be a man with her to help her on doing things. It's just the culture, just how they did things back then. Not saying it was right or wrong, just that's how they did things. So her husband says, well, but why go now? It's not a feast time, basically. That's what he's talking about. Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. He's like, why would you go to them on any other day than when those rituals are happening? In fact, J.R. Dummelow, in his book Commentary on the Holy Bible, page 231, said this. He said, the Shunammite's husband did not connect his wife's proposed visit to the prophet with the death of his child, but with some religious duty. The new moon, i.e. the first day of the month, and the Sabbath were feasts at which the prophets might be asked to preside, as Samuel did at the feast held at the high place of Ramah. So he's not thinking about calling he's not thinking, oh, she's going to go get the man of God, and man of God is going to come back and bring our son back to life for us. He's saying she probably wants to go be consoled or talk to the man of God, probably about their loss. And so he's like, but it's not the right day to go talk to the prophet. Usually those are on these feast days. And she says, don't worry about it. It's all going to be taken care of. So verse 24, then she saddled an ass and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. So she's like, go, let's run. I'll tell you if we need to slow down. Otherwise, let's keep the pace up. Verse 25, so she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi, his servant, behold, yonder is that Shunammite. So Elijah's servant Gehazi, he's like, oh, look, that's that Shunammite that takes care of us. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, it is well. Is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. So he sends Gehazi out to meet her while she's journeying in, going, is everything okay with your family? And she says, it is. Verse 27, when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to thrust her away. So caught him by the feet, most likely she is bowing down. He's walking by, and she's like, wait, hold on, and grabs his ankle, basically, or his foot. Gehazi's like, no, get away. And the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her. And the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me. So he knows something's wrong, something's going on with her, but the Spirit's not telling him what's wrong with her. Verse 28, then she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, gird up thy loins, and take my staff in thine hand, and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not, and if any salute thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. So remember, gird up thy loins means you reach down, you grab the bottom of the because they wore flowing robes, they didn't wear pants. You grab the bottom of the robe, you pull it up forward, and you tuck it into your belt, so you have kind of the like pantaloon pants is what it looks like, because you can run. You can't run. You're limited in a dress or with those flowing robes. You're limited on how fast you can run. But if you pull them up in the middle and kind of make it look like you have a split skirt on or something like that, then you can run. You can actually do better. So take my staff and run. Get there quickly, and don't talk to people along the way. Just go. Don't avoid everybody else. Basically, put my staff on the face of the child. Verse 30, and the mother of the child said, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. So she wanted him to administer. She's like, I'm not leaving your sight, basically. Verse 31, and Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff upon the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him and told him, saying, the child is not awaked. And when Elijah was come into the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. And he went in therefore and shut the door upon them twain and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. So he brought this child back to life. Again, we don't know why the child died. We don't know if it was an injury or an ailment or something the child had. And for some reason, Elijah decided to lay on the child, eye to eye, nose to nose, mouth, like line himself up with the child while he was praying and communing with God to deal with this. Why he felt that was important to do, we don't know. Maybe it has something to do with helping revive the child. Maybe it was a hypothermic type situation and the child comes back because his body was warmed up. Maybe it's a total miracle. We don't know. Did the Spirit tell Elijah to lay on the kid like that? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he just did it thinking maybe this is going to help. Maybe it didn't really help. Maybe it was more of their faith and praying and priesthood that helped more than laying on the child. We don't know. There's a few questions around that, but that's okay. Just don't worry about that part, basically, until we get more information. But the child became alive again. He was responsive. He opened his eyes, was conscious and aware again. Verse 36, and he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and she was come in to him. He said, take up thy son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. Now, this is amazing, the miracles this woman is seeing. She has true faith in a prophet of God, and she is receiving many miracles because of that. It's really cool stories. Verse 38, and Elijah came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land. Usually a dearth is like a famine or a drought going on, basically. And the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said unto his servant, set on the great pot and seethe pottage for the sons of the prophets. So prepare some food, basically, some oatmeal type thing for them. Verse 39, and one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered thereof wild gourds, his lap full, and came and shred them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. So he doesn't realize what he's putting in there, but he's putting gourds in there. Now, a gourd is like squash or pumpkin. Okay, these plants that have kind of an external shell to them, and all the soft stuff is on the inside. That's a gourd. Like a pumpkin is a gourd, or a squash, those kinds of things. Verse 40, so they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, that they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat thereof. But he said, then bring meal. And he cast it into the pot. And he said, pour out for the people that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. So he probably put some stuff in there that you're not supposed to have. Now, this is an important thing to understand when you look at herbology and other things. This is what they had back then. Okay, in our day and age, we call it, new age medicine, or we have all these alternative medicine or these other terms for it as well. Back then, it was just called medicine. That's all they did. They didn't have pharmacology like we have today. Pharmacology became something because of herbal medicines in the past. So don't discount herbal medicines today. Not saying they all work, but some work pretty good. So here's the thing, though. He gathered some stuff that, and it says here, death is in the pot, and that could mean we're sick. There's something in there that our body's reacting to. Some chemicals you can put in your body, some herbs, you'll get a violent reaction out of it. Basically, like you want to throw up, like the syrup of ipecac type stuff that we used to use as a kid. If you needed to throw up, take some syrup of ipecac, swallow it, and your body's going to for sure throw it up because it was just so nasty tasting. It could be something like that. It could be it was a poisonous herb that he put in there, and they're like, wait, this is not a good thing. So maybe it was just really bad tasting. It could be just the herbs and the gourd and stuff just made it horrible tasting, basically. But the thing is that Elijah takes some meal, okay, which is like a flour, ground up corn or barley or something like that. Barley was extremely common back in this time. So it's a good chance it's barley. He grabs some meal and he put some in there. Probably had a prayer or something he said as well. And the food became fine to eat. It didn't taste bad. It didn't have the problems it had before. So that's another miracle of providing food for people as well. Verse 42, and there came a man from Baal Shalisha and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and full ears of corn in the husk thereof. And he said, give unto the people that they may eat. So he's giving food to Elijah and the prophets to say, distribute this out, basically. Verse 43, and his servitor said, what should I set this before 100 men? And he said, give the people that they may eat. For thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and shall leave thereof. So he set it before them, and they did eat and left thereof according to the word of the Lord. So this is a person who's coming, doing his best to keep the commandments, basically, and he's following the law of giving stuff, basically giving of his substance to others, which is really cool thing. So I'd love to hear if you have thought through this chapter, the parallels with the Savior's life, of the miracles he performed. I'd love to hear that in the chapter, what you think about those. And let's jump to the next chapter, chapter 5, to learn more.